Hi, everybody. I'm back for a November session of I've been reading. I've got several that I've read, and my backlog keeps growing. So I'll just list off the books that I'm considering, and then I'll plug through them as I get inspired after I finish the ones that I'm already reading. First, I'll just share the ones that I've just read. So I just finished Alan Watts' Become What You Are. I found this. This is a really good book, and I've listened to Alan Watts lectures before. I read another book called The Book by him. All of those tend to have these little witticisms that are sprinkled in here and there that catch my ear and my imagination. This book, though, felt very succinct. Like each chapter is a little lecture, if you will, that has a beginning and a middle and an end on a single concept. And I found this a very great way to digest Alan Watts. One of my favorite stories out of here was when he talked about the wheel. So the idea that to truly understand Zen, you have to understand what it's like to walk on the wheel, which if you're on a huge wheel and you're standing on the top, you can't necessarily see the future. And you have to let go of the past. So you have to walk as the wheel moves, and you have to trust that the future is going to be there for you to step on. And if you decide to hold on to the past, the wheel will take you down with it, right? I thought that was a very good metaphor, and it captured my imagination. There's a lot of things like that in here that really help me think about things in a different way. So I really appreciated this book. I finally finished the Leonard Cohen book, Book of Longing. It's a book of poems by Leonard Cohen. He has a lot of self portraits of himself as an old man, and his poetry in this book feels like an old man lamenting that he's no longer the young buck that he used to be, and that he still has all the same desires as he had when he was in his 20s. There's also some laments for friends who have died and things like that. He has a few poems in here. I think he stayed in a monastery in California for a while. So you get the sense that a lot of these poems were possibly written during that period of him just contemplating on his life and the meaning of it. And there's a lot of wistfulness and a lot of, you feel a sense of resignation in these poems. Like he's resigned to his lot in life and where he was at that moment, at that time. I found it started to get tedious towards the end. However, I also feel like the poems towards the end were the better poems. But because I'm a fan of Leonard Cohen, it was still interesting to get that insight. I also finished The Mist Filled Path. Okay. So this is by Frank McEwen. I think he goes by a different name now. And I was able to find, like, he has a website, he does some kind of retreats and things like that now. So if I'm completely honest, I found this book a little annoying. But what's funny about it, even though the narrative felt annoying to me a little bit, people who claim to be shamans and things like that, they can they can be a little bit in their own heads about their own experiences, and you get a sense of strong ego and things like that. That tends to turn me off. I like humility. One of the most interesting stories out of this, The Mist-Filled Path, it's Celtic wisdom for exiles, wanderers, and seekers. He does have a chapter in here in which he did the sun dance, and he was invited by Native American elders to do the sun dance. And he grappled with that as a white American, whether he could or should. And they insisted, the elders insisted that he should join them, that he understood the struggles of Native Americans because of the history of the Irish people, that 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 history is in his bones, just like the history of the Native American peoples and their struggles are in their bones. So he had a place at the table. I thought that whole narrative around that was probably the best part of the book. The other things that captured my imagination was this idea of walking through the mist. Of a lot of people tend to sleepwalk through life. What is it like to try to fully be awake. These kind of vague concepts that you would typically get from a book like this, using different language. But it did cause me to think, as much as this book annoyed me, I thought a lot about, how much have I been sleepwalking for a period of time, or what would it be like to truly, going back to Alan Watts, right? Let go of the past and not have too many expectations of the future, but just live in the moment. So all of this was, I can't say I would recommend this book, but I can say that it was useful to me. I'll put it that way. I finished this book, Attached, by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. So this book was recommended to me by a therapist, and I got a lot out of this book about the dynamics of relationships and how they work, some of the pitfalls of the different types. There's stuff around attachment theory is a theory around relationships that I think started off with how babies react when their mother leaves the room and then comes back, what that relationship is like. And then what they realize is that those studies were actually applicable to adults and adult relationships, that those tendencies tend to stay with us. I would recommend this book. If you're interested in the psychology of relationships, if you're interested in kind of giving yourself a little bit of a framework and ways to think about things, I found this to be a high recommendation. Okay. Then I read this book by Neil Gaiman. It's called Norse Mythology. I'll admit this book was disappointing to me in some ways. I'll tell you the positives, though. The positives is that it's written in very simple language. So it's very kind of fairy tale type, folk tale kind of language. I think I was looking for a little more symbolism or kind of the deeper themes. One example is apparently Odin sacrificed himself to himself and hung himself from a tree and gouged out his eye for the sake of attaining wisdom and to understand the ruins, right? The mystical ruins. And there's a lot you can pull from that. I don't feel like that this book was aiming to do any of that kind of symbology in its storytelling. It was more about the personalities. The things that I did pull out of this book, though, when it comes to Norse mythology and kind of the themes, there was one line in there that said Thor was off fighting giants, and the town was peaceful, and people liked that Thor was not there, because when he's there, it's not very peaceful. But they also missed him because without him, Asgard was unprotected. So it's this idea that sometimes you don't want someone around, but you still need them. And there's a lot of tales around Loki and how mischievous he is. And he's very similar. They kept him around because he's very clever when it comes to problem solving. But he was a nuisance and was always mischievous and causing problems for everybody. Eventually, his 3 children create Ragnarok and destroy all the gods. The second thing that I thought was kind of beautiful that I read out of this book is that after Ragnarok, when everything is obliterated and destroyed, a few of the gods actually survived, and they started life anew. And I think that tale of hope leading up to this cataclysmic moment of Ragnarok, and then having this kind of renewal, kind of this start over kind of aspect, was quite beautiful. And that's probably the most touching part of the book here for me. All right. That's everything I've read recently. Now I've got a big stack of things that I plan to read, and I won't talk too much about them. Well, first I'll tell you what I am reading so that you can see that. I've got 3 that I've started. I do want to say, so Emma Magnolia, commenter, recommended this book. Thank you. This was a much better Alan Watts book than the other one I read. And also recommended Jim Harrison. I bought an anthology of complete poems. I've gotten partway into this anthology so far, and what I like about him is I think he approaches writing poetry from a very from a purposeful kind of lens. Like you get the sense that his poems are prayers in a sense to humanity, or about humanity, or about his experience and things like that. And I find that so far, from what I've read, I find it very touching and very moving. So thank you for that recommendation as well. The other one that I'm starting to read now is Celtic Myth and Legend by Charles Squire. This one I like better than the Norse one, and the reason being is because whereas it's not necessarily an academic treatise, it's pulling from academic sources, and it's quoting where those sources came from in terms of the stories and what anthropologists or archaeologists think might be the origins of some of these stories. So it feels a little more academic to me, which I appreciate, and it kind of tells, a lot of the story is very straightforward. I don't feel like there's extra bells and whistles added to it for the sake of narrative and things like that. As you know, when we unravel ancient legends, especially when there's not a whole lot of literature that survives, people tend to try to fill in the pieces. And I imagine that people have filled in the pieces, the culture probably filled in the pieces over hundreds of years. So what we have today is other people that filled in pieces, right? But so far, I find this to be a good read. I was a little worried at first because it uses kind of highfalutin language a little bit to sound like it's, I don't know, like words like wherefore and things like that, or but eventually the language calmed down, and I don't feel it as much now that I'm getting to the stories of it. So I'm happy with this one so far. It's in progress, and then I'm going to ask that you all stay with me on this one. This one's a little out there for me. Okay, I bought a book called Intentional Tarot, and the reason being, I've been watching some videos and different things, but what I find interesting about tarot from a songwriting standpoint is that each one of these cards, right, are packed with symbolism. And over, I don't know, 1,000 years? I don't know how long tarot's been around. I think since like the 1090 or something like that. And it's still going strong. Like people really gravitate to this kind of thing. I don't personally, and I don't judge people who think differently, but personally I don't believe in the hocus kind of pocus part of it, or the magic or the spirit or whatever, the channeling aspect of it. But I do think that there's a century or so of wisdom in these cards about human nature, and I think that's why people keep gravitating back. And well, that's why people gravitate to the tarot. I mean, part of it's the divination, like what's going to happen with my life and things like that. And again, I don't necessarily believe in the divination aspect of it, but I do think it's an interesting starting point for a conversation with yourself as to what things mean to you, and to reflect on your own life and say, well, how does this story, right, apply to me? What does it say to me? It's an interesting mental exercise, and I believe it tells a story about humanity. So I'm looking for songwriting inspiration in the same way that I look to folktales for songwriting inspiration. I'm looking for the core of the human experience, and then to be able to mold that or convert that into stories that resonate with people. So this is my strategy. It may or may not work, but I'm enjoying the journey. Okay. So other books I picked up, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Many people have told me over the years to get this book, and I never got around to it. And now that I'm back to reading again pretty voraciously, I decided to pick it up. So there's that. The Bhagavad Gita. So this is actually, I wanted one without any annotations or any descriptions or anything like that. This is a straight up translation of the poems. Okay, so the way I see it is a lot of spiritual language. If you again, I'm more on the atheistic side of things, but if you read this as poetry, if you read any kind of spiritual guidance as poetry, there's something deeper there that speaks to what makes us all human, that what binds us all together. So I'm looking for different experiences. I actually, a couple of years ago, I read the Puranas. There's an English translation of kind of like I'd equate it to the biblical Old Testament stories of like Noah and the Ark and the creation stories and things like that. So I had a book of Puranas, which is the Hindi creation story and the story of the gods and the ancient time before people, and that book still kind of pokes up in my brain and makes me think about the world in a different way because of the poetry in it. So people that I work with from India, they've recommended, if you really like that, you might like the philosophy that's in this book too. So I'm going to check that out. All right. I've got a couple of books here by Raymond Carver. So these are poetry books. My wife Tina gave these to me to read. It's some of her favorite poetry. So this one's called A New Path to the Waterfall. And I think from what she told me, he wrote this book of poetry after he was diagnosed, I believe with cancer, and knew he was going to die. So she says it's kind of a tragic read. But again, I bet there's a lot to get out of that. And then this one here is Tess Gallagher, Amplitude, new and selected poems. So she gave me that. So these two I'm going to have on my list, and I'll be sure to read. And then, I went shopping yesterday and at Half Price Books. I found this by chance, a biography on Beethoven by Jan Swafford. So Jan Swafford, back in I want to say the 90s, did a biography on Brahms that I loved. It was a very rich, very dense biography on Brahms. I mean, quoting a lot of his opuses during certain parts of his life and what was going on in his life. So I found myself, while reading that book, looking up various music from that period of the life that I was reading about, and getting the backstory to some of the anguish and things like that. Of course, Beethoven is another very tragic kind of hero in music in terms of his life and the anguish of the artist, if you will. Anyway, well, I was asked in a comment if I could maybe do a longer form, so I decided to go a little more in depth this time. I'm excited about what's in front of me. I'm excited about the things that I've learned, and I'm excited to learn more. So thank you all for your attention, and let me know what you think, or let me know what you're reading. I'm curious. Okay? Thanks. Bye.